Good evening. This is Bill Dixon. I'm President of North Carolina Vietnam Veterans, and I have with me today my co-host and cohort, Bob Matthews. Bob, we're excited about being here tonight and doing this show because we actually get somebody to actually listen to us about Vietnam. That was hard to get done.
It is, Billy. It's one of those rare opportunities where we have a chance to tell the world a good story.
Yeah. This show is called The Lessons of Vietnam. There's a lot of different lessons coming out of that. And I recently found something that really kind of talks about a little bit about why we teach Vietnam and why we talk about Vietnam. I want to share it. I hate to read stuff, but because I read poorly, but I want to read this. I'm going to call the man's name Bob because I didn't ask for permission to use this stuff, but I'm going to just take a brief thing. It says, a couple of years ago, someone asked me if I still thought about Vietnam. I nearly laughed in their face. How do you stop thinking about it? Every day for the last 24 years, I wake up with it and go to bed with it. But this is what I said. Yeah, I think about it. I can't quit thinking about it. I never will. But I've also learned to live with it. I'm comfortable with the memories. I've learned to stop trying to forget and learn instead to embrace it. It just doesn't scare me anymore. A psychologist once told me that not being affected by the experience over there would be abnormal. When he told me that, it was like he'd just given me a pardon. It was as if he said, go ahead and feel something about the place, Bob. It ain't going nowhere. You're going to wear it for the rest of your life. Might as well get to know it. And it finishes up with, when were you last in Vietnam? Hey, man, I was there just last night with your dreams and thoughts. That's basically what we are, what we've been doing the last few years, and with your course that you taught in the schools a little bit. This is North Carolina Vietnam Veterans Incorporated, but part of that is the Bridge Back Foundation, and Bob, you kind of put that together. Tell us a little bit about what you had in mind with the Bridge Back Foundation and why it's came about and where it's grown and so forth.
Certainly. I'd be glad to. That was a nice piece you read by Bob. And I think one of the nice things about that kind of work is you get a chance to ask the veterans what they think, and they have an audience. And one of the reasons we started this course several years ago, almost 20 years ago, by the way, Bill, was that there was nothing being taught about Vietnam in the schools, and there were a lot of questions being asked, and there were no answers. And we started thinking about how to do this, the best way to do it, and we came up with the catchy slogan called the Bridge Back. And the Bridge Back has nothing to do with construction. The Bridge Back was meant to be emotionally a bridge for the Vietnam veterans to go back to Vietnam mentally, physically, educationally, come into the classrooms. In Wake County, of course, we started in Pennsylvania, and elicit teachers, social studies teachers, who would be willing to go a step farther than they used to. There were no books, there were no study guides. They had to go out in the community and get the veterans to come into the classroom. I call it the living library. I had the opportunity one night years ago. I moved down here from Pennsylvania, and I met you guys, the NCVVI, North Carolina Vietnam Veterans, and I walked into the meeting with one thought in mind, and that was to get help in teaching Vietnam because I couldn't do it alone. But it had to be taught. I mean, everybody says they knew about Vietnam, but they all lied because no one did. But now everybody wants to talk about Vietnam. So we got the veterans involved. Mike Hooks, Joe Harsh, I go on and on with names. I met 25 of the best men and women I've ever met in my life. And they listened to me. They said, what do you want? I said, I want $300. I want to build a bridge, a little small bridge, to one school in Wake County called Enloe High School. I want enough money to go in front of the school board with some ammunition. And I didn't really mean ammunition. Gonna watch how you say that today. I meant verbal ammunition. When they asked me my questions, I could say, yes, here's the textbook, because I purchased it. Yes, here's the objectives. Yes, here's the length of the course. I could answer all of their questions. And believe me, they ask questions. Because as well as you're sitting here with me tonight, Bill Dixon, You know as well as I do, no one wanted Vietnam taught in schools. So when the bridge was built, there wasn't much traffic on it. It was a one-lane bridge. And we started building it to each school, then this school, then this school. And then we got very, very fortunate in the mid-90s. We ran into a woman named Esther Dunnigan.
Yes.
And Esther Dunnigan is retired head of Wake County School Social Studies. And she had the insight, and I would say maybe the foresight, to say this needs to be done. Let's have a workshop and bring all the teachers in and bring all the vets in, and let's get busy. And with Esther's leadership and her, I think her stewardship, really, we ran into 12 teachers who were willing to listen. And you know, teachers are a tough sell. And they started to build the bridge with me. And as the vets come in, we worked together elbow to elbow. Nobody was in charge. Everybody was on the same mission to build a curriculum called the Bridge Back, and eventually, physically, go back to Vietnam. But the first lane of the bridge was not going back to Vietnam. It was going into the classrooms, going into the students, into their hearts, into their minds, and opening up the library and letting them ask veterans questions they had never asked before. And it worked like a well-oiled machine. And as we were by year, as we got bigger, we went from one school, as you mentioned last week, we now are at over 750 schools nationwide. And we've been speaking coast to coast. And we put a second lane on the bridge. We actually went to Vietnam twice, and we're going again.
Well, Bob, would be safe to say that you burn a few bridges building the bridge.
Oh, yes.
But luckily, people like Esther believed in what you were doing. And in fact, I believe you took her to Vietnam, didn't you?
Yes.
And some teachers.
Esther went on the, the first educational trip to Vietnam. Her and 4 other teachers went to Vietnam, and she suggested it herself at the meeting. She said, let's go to Vietnam and get an inside look at this nation that most people don't understand. The people of Vietnam. And she also said to me, because Bob, remember, Vietnam is a country, not just a war. The Vietnamese are people, not just soldiers. This woman was smart.
Yeah.
She knew what she was doing, and she let me do my thing and let the vets come into the classroom and let them do their thing. And like I said, we met several wonderful teachers, and there's several today are involved in the bridge. But that's the story of the bridge, and I think we're about ready to add a third lane.
I know that speaking to the students all over that we've spoken to all over the country, it's amazing. Students get such a bad rap, but every time we've been in the class, we've always been very, very well received and lots of good questions, and it's just been amazing the response we've had from the students. And I think a lot of veterans come back and say, well, I don't want to talk about it and so forth. Who've gone into class and said, I don't want to say anything, but I just want to go sit in there, and then you can't get them to shut up before the class is over with, because it's a real healing process for the veterans who go in and speak to the kids, because the kids seem to be show respect and interest in the course.
Well, this was my plan, is we would start with this teaching Vietnam. We would not allow the students to be painted with a broad brush. They're all not potheads. They're all not this. They're all not that. Go into a high school today, and most people today, adults, never go back to their high school. They're a little afraid to go back, and public speaking is terrifying to most people anyway. So when you go to the veterans, as you said, a lot of them said, no way. So my plan was to get vets in the classroom, maybe take 2 or 3 in at a time, and give the students a treat. Give the students a chance to go and ask questions to first-person history. We call it primary sources. I call it the living library again. But these are men and women who served in a war, have multitude of experiences. They can share these with the students. Then the kids take them home. And usually when they go home at the kitchen table and someone says to them, what'd you do in school today? They say nothing. Well, not that day. They go home and say, what'd you do? Oh, we had 3 vets in class, Vietnam veterans. And pretty soon they're going to dialogue with their parents. And it's self-serving, but it was planned. And all the veterans I've talked to, I invited into the classroom, they can't wait to go back. And then it led to the linkage program, which we'll get into a little later. But I do think you're right. is the veterans that go in, they get as much, if not more, out of it than the students do.
If I remember correctly, you had a student in your one of your earlier classes who discovered his father was a Vietnam vet because he was taking stuff home and talking about the war and so forth, and his father finally came up and said, "Hey, I'm a Vietnam vet," and really got involved after that.
That's a great story. His name is Sean Rowley, and Sean was in class, excellent student, really nice kid at Enloe, and he kept going home, and finally he came to me one day and said, "Coach, I just found something out that my dad's a vet." I didn't know it, and his dad kept it in the closet. Not that his dad was embarrassed about his service. He just felt that Vietnam was not something he wanted to talk or brag about. Well, Sean pushed his buttons, and his name is Dan Rowley. Lives here in Cary, a great guy. And Dan, ironically, got so involved then, he made the cover of USA Today. Sean and Dan made a nationwide story about Vietnam Hits Home, it was called. And we're great friends. He's good friends of the NCBI and the Bridge Back. But that's one of many stories that students have taken it well past an assignment. It's become part of their life.
Yeah.
We've made contact with these kids 10, 15 years later.
Yes, that's one of the amazing things to me is some of the students are still interested and still very close to some of those who spoke and doing the linkage program. The education part was what Bridgeback started, and then it kind of grew into another part. In 2009, when we went back as a group of veterans, 12 of us went back. We decided to go back and see what it was all about because you had gone. But we decided at the same time we wanted to give back a little bit, and so we made arrangements to do a couple things while we were there.
Yes, we did.
And it really opened up a whole new world for the Bridge Back. It has been as rewarding, and it's actually an extension of the educational part with what we've done with the schools in Vietnam and so forth. And we have some pictures if we could. In 2009, we went back. This is an orphanage in Vietnam. It's right outside of Hue. The English translation for the name of the orphanage is Sweetwater. And that's some of the kids who are greeting us when we drove up in the bus. You can see the courtyard out front is all covered with moss and mold and all broken up and so forth. That's a Catholic orphanage. It had actually been supported since about 1963-65 by American soldiers. It was started out as an Amerasian orphanage. And before we went there, we asked them what they needed. We figured they needed something, mattresses or whatever. But they said what they really needed was the government schools allowed the orphanage to teach their students up to about the third grade, I think it is, either the third or fourth. They're able to teach up that long, and after that they had to start going to the regular public school, and
Right.
some of them were 5 or 6 miles away, so it was hard for the kids to get there. So we asked them what they needed, and they said they needed bicycles. So what we actually did was we bought, if I remember correctly, you carried the money in a satchel, and we paid for and bought 50 bicycles, and we took the kids on the bus with us and went up to where the bicycles were, and the head sister let each child get off. She'd select, get a bicycle, and pick out their bicycle, and it was quite a fit. There's the bicycle. Some of the bicycles, all of them had baskets, different colors and so forth. And to see those kids' faces on those bicycles was something very, very special. That alone was just sold me on the trip. It was well worth what it took, the time and money to do the trip. The next picture, this is the kids after they got on the bicycles riding back to the orphanage, and you can see how happy they are and so forth. And the townspeople in that entire village all came out. It was like
a carnival.
It was like a carnival for the entire day. Everybody was there watching those kids get the bicycles and so forth. And let's see, the next picture, it shows, that's a couple of good-looking guys right there. That's kind of how the entrance to the orphanage looked when we got there. That's one of our members, Dave Samuels. He was a helicopter pilot there during the war. But that's how broken up and the grass and so forth. So we asked them before we left there, what do you need now? And we just kind of like to help you along, and what do you need now? And as you remember a while ago in the picture, the courtyard out front was all broken up concrete. It was covered with moss. You could almost ice skate on it when it rained. And they said they needed a playground. Now, we heard the word playground, and we heard different from what they were thinking about playground. What they were talking about playground was basically tearing out all that old concrete and putting new concrete back in. And when we heard playground, it was playground, tearing out all the old concrete and putting it back in with playground equipment. And when you're in the United States and they're in Vietnam, it's kind of hard to do some of that, but we worked it out. So we had, back to that picture we were just seeing, we had all the picture before that if we could. What we did was we had all the old concrete torn out. We had grading put back in with drainages and so forth. And we drove up. You can see the floor there. It was tile. It was concrete and tiled. So different from when it was there. And the next picture shows a little bit more about the tile that was put down. That's some of the playground equipment that we were trying to put together. It was interesting. I don't know how many pieces there were, but there was too many pieces. We put the entire playground together with one socket wrench and one adjustable wrench, I believe.
My hand's still
and there was cases and cases of nuts and bolts. I've never seen some nuts and bolts. But that's us putting the playground together on the new courtyard. That's the classrooms back behind us. The kids were sitting in the classroom and watching us as we put the playground together, all excited. And I don't see the sister there. The next picture is we had I had a swing made in Vietnam, and we got there and brought the swings and all from local supplier that was Wood Play of Carolinas. Those were absolutely fantastic people to work with. They helped us out with those swings and so forth. So we hooked those up. It was kind of funny. We were told the kids probably wouldn't know how to use the playground equipment. As you can see there, they didn't have any problem learning how to on the swings. And that's what we're still working there. And the next picture shows us that's the playground kind of going up. One of the slides is there. They were going up and down that slide while we were still trying to put it up. They had no problem whatsoever learning. And you can see the tile and so forth. And the next picture shows us that's still in the playground. Was not through with it yet. There's a yellow tube back there that's a tunnel slide, and as you can see, they're all over it while we were putting it together. I think there's another whole section on that, put it together with the swings and so forth. Those kids were just absolutely fantastic playing on it. And the next picture, let's see, that's the illustrious crew that put it together. That's Sister Mary, who was kind of like the Attila the Hun of the orphanage. Whatever she said, all the other sisters and the kids did exactly.
I was scared of her.
Yes.
I was scared of her.
But I tell you what, she took good care of us. I mean, every time we turned around, she was trying to give us something to drink or whatever. So, but that's how the playground was finished up. That was kind of the closing ceremonies. We had a special ceremony. And let's see, the next picture. While we were doing it, the kids were in the classroom and they were drawing those pictures. The kids did that, and I understand down at the bottom it says in Vietnamese, "Thank you, Uncle."
It does.
Thank you for the playground. That's some of the playground there that they drew. And I think the next picture is a swing, and it's in English, "Thank you." But that's how excited the kids were. They drew those, and those are very special to those of us that have got copies of that sort of stuff. But that kind of gives you an idea why we go back and went back, and we're planning on doing the same thing again next year. We're in the middle of a fundraiser right now to raise money to do a playground like this again in Dong Ha, which is right on the DMZ, not too far from Phu Bai and a couple other places. We've been asked to put in a playground for 130 autistic children, and next door to that is a home for street children. And anybody would like to participate or get more information, either contact Bob Matthews at 600 Webster Street in Cary, North Carolina, 27511.
Yes, it is.
And we'll send you more information about it. And If you have some extra, moldy money that you need to get rid of, we could definitely use it. These kids appreciate it. So get in touch with myself or Bob or call into the show. We'll try to tell you a little bit more about it. Also, what we want to talk about, by the way, give you if you want to call in the number, it's 919-518-9773. Now, along with what we've done with the playground there, we also did another, which I think is just as important, is what we did with the schools.
Education.
The education part with the schools. This is Bob in the picture there. He is teaching a class in Vietnam. He really likes teaching classes in Vietnam because when he walked in the door, all the students stood up in attention and didn't say a word.
I like that.
And so that's Bob teaching a course. And I'm going to turn it over to Bob and let you talk about a little bit about the course and the packets and so forth, because that's your expertise.
Thank you, Bill. And Bill's being very modest, by the way. The trip back to Vietnam with the 12 veterans, we carried 39 suitcases, and many of the doctors and the dentists in Wake County contributed all kinds of things for us, and McDonald's had the Beanie Babies. So we carried 39 suitcases to the orphanage. Now they have toothpaste for 100 years, and they have toothbrushes. They can build a house with them. We took everything back, and the playground that we finished building at the school, at the orphanage, is nicknamed now the Oasis in Asia. It's beautiful. And Bill Dixon, through the internet and through his expertise as an engineer, did it all. We raised some money, but Bill arranged for everything to be done. And when we got there, we were a little afraid what we'd see. And you saw the photographs recently. It turned out to be wonderful. The kids were happy. We were happy. The vets were happy. All the contributors to the Bridge Back were very happy. And the Global Spectrum is the travel agency that takes us to Vietnam and arranges everything. They had so much connection with this, it's not part of their tour package. They go to Sweetwater to show people what can be done between the youth of America and the Vietnamese youth. As Bill mentioned, our linkage program has developed into an international program whereby we go into a high school. And we've done this at Cary High School, Athens Drive, East Alamance High School. 3 high schools in North Carolina have put together packages for the students there. A brown envelope about 4x8, 5x8. We talk to the kids and we tell them, put yourself in an envelope, lay it on the table, leave it alone. Walk by it 3 or 4 times, and you'll see them right here, opening their packages right there in the photograph. We came in, and they could not wait to see us, as Bill mentioned. And they opened that envelope, and inside was the Bridge Back. And all of a sudden, Bill, go ahead.
That's the picture of them, and I don't know who that good-looking veteran is right there with them, but
in the green shirt?
They're opening up their packets, and it was like Christmas. I mean, it was so funny. Those kids are just like kids here. The girls will open up the packages from boys, and they're looking at the pictures of the boys and giggling and talking to each other, and so were the boys. And just watching them open those packages with the kids was.
And we had all the veterans on the trip, 12 veterans. And I was the only one that had been back to Vietnam before. And these men, who are like my brothers, went back to Vietnam. You know, all of a sudden, it looked like they were back. They're talking to students. They're surrounded by students, as you see. They open up the envelopes. They're going through it, question after question. All of a sudden, before we left Vietnam, they were emailing the kids back in America, setting up an international pen pal network. In fact, right now, we figure we have 400 pen pals in Wake County through Vietnam, and we have 2 teachers. I want to give you their names tonight.
Yeah. You can see from the picture there, the young lady there is so excited about opening her packet and so forth. It was kind of funny. One of the guys that put together a package was a big hockey fan.
Yes, he was.
And he had put in a ice hockey puck. And trying to explain to a young Vietnamese girl what an ice hockey game is and a puck was a real challenge. But as far as the emails, that was 2009, this picture, and they're still, some of them are still emailing each other back and forwards. And this picture is the last time, in 2009, with the English club at Dong Ha. that we're also giving out the packages for, Bob.
And we talked about 2 high schools, really 3, and the teachers were so engaged with this that we met teachers in Vietnam, and English is not their second language. It might be their first language in Vietnam now. Almost everybody is fluent in English. We talked 2 teachers in Vietnam and 3 teachers in North Carolina into exchanging lesson plans, tests, and teaching by Skype each other's classes. And this has opened up a floodgate of requests. And it looks like Wake County Schools, who set I guess we'll say we're pioneers of teaching Vietnam in America, in Wake County. We have been called the finest curriculum in the nation. But now a new chapter's opened up. Teachers are teaching from their classroom students in Vietnam and vice versa. And people like Jim Baum and Russell Page and Dave Ebert down in Alamance County are really wonderful because they have broken the mold. They're setting a new pace, and they're taking our schools into the next century, where really there are no borders anymore. And the bridge back, I think, may have a 4th lane.
Well, it's amazing. It's opened up an opportunity for the American students to one-on-one discuss with the Vietnamese students a little bit about their life and the life here, and comparing their life in communism as opposed to the free enterprise here, and how much a short stubby pencil means a whole lot to them in Vietnam. And here the kids just kind of have a tendency to just take them for granted and chew them and so forth. And over there, they have so little that everything is a big thing. And,
it is.
And giving our kids a chance to reach out and touch someone else in another part of the world has been
it's amazing.
It's been very special, and it's meant a whole lot for the students we've talked to that are still involved with it.
It's meant a whole lot to the veterans, too, because the guys went over and they opened up this new avenue of education. Then they come back to the classroom, they're better speakers. It's just one hand washing the other. And as we go back and do this international exchange, we hope you will call in if you have any questions, because we're going to be on every 2 weeks from 7:30 to 8:30. If you have a question or a comment, or even maybe a suggestion of how we might be able to do a better job than we're doing, give us a call at 919-518-9773, or Skype at Computers 2K Voice. You can talk directly to us. And it's been a labor of love. And our next trip, we're going in next May, as Bill mentioned earlier. We have 12 people going so far. Donations are flowing in. Of course, we need more. But donations are flowing in, and we thank you again already for those that are helping us. And it looks like this is going to be a very successful trip as we do our second playground in May of 2014.
And if you're interested in going with us, contact Bob, and we'll see if we can put you in lined up. We work with Global Spectrum, which is out of Fairfax, Virginia. Marcia and her staff there, they're not just a travel agent. They have a foundation themselves to reduce poverty in Southeast Asia. They do a lot of work in Vietnam. They do a lot of work in Burma. And our guide that we was introduced to, Song, he's actually has been over the United States recently to talk with veterans about going back to Vietnam that have post-traumatic stress. He has put together a program on his own to help Vietnam veterans or any veterans basically to handle the post-traumatic stress problems and so forth. But Marcia and her crew have an office in Dong Ha,
Yes.
and that's where we work through them, because that way we don't give the money to the government. We take the money with us to the people over there. So that's a little bit about the Global Spectrum Foundation and how we're able to get work done over there, because we have people we trust and believe in, and they believe in us over there. And
Well, Bill, the whole answer to the whole thing, and a lot of Vietnam vets are still mad about the war, the way it was handled. And you start to teach something this diverse, Vietnam, it's like opening up a can of worms. There's so much to talk about. You have to be willing to talk about everything. And once you set that premise to students, you can ask any question about anything. And we have the living library. We'll answer your question. If we can't answer it, we'll find the answer and get back to you. You got a question?
we kind of just said a long time ago when we go into class, you can ask any question you want to, but we also reserve the right to say, no, we don't want to answer.
Sure. Or
you have to be willing to accept the answer that you get, because it may not be something that you like or whatever, but we're going to try to give you the most truthful answer we can give you, and so forth. Last time we got together, there was a question came up as far as draftees and so forth, and I've got some little bit of statistics here. I have a hard time saying the word statistics, so you just have to forgive me there.
Okay.
My southern tongue doesn't come on some of these things. Just kind of give you an idea, draftees versus volunteers, 25% of the total forces in country were draftees. That's kind of small when you start thinking about it. You start thinking about it, they were just drafting people, sending them to Vietnam, only 25%. In World War II, 66% of the people were draftees. So you heard about the greatest generation, how they all dropped what they were doing and went into the military during the war. Well, if you look at it that way, more people went into war during Vietnam than did in World War II. Draftees accounted for 30.4% of combat deaths in Vietnam. People sometimes forget that the reserves, a lot of people try to get in the reserves and the National Guard, but both of those served in Vietnam. The reservists, there was 5,977 reservists killed. National Guard had 9,000 men and women serve, and of those, 22 were killed in action. So getting to the National Guard or going to reservists was not necessarily the way out of the war. And and some people talk about the ethnicity of the war. 88.4% of the men who actually served in Vietnam were Caucasian, including Hispanics. 10.6% were black, and 1% belonged to other races.
There's one thing that we should attempt, and that's some of the myths of Vietnam that Bill is trying to dispel and doing a good job at it, is that everyone for a while thought that Vietnam was a poor man's war. That all the poor white kids and black kids and Puerto Rican kids were drafted in Vietnam. Well, Bill just destroyed that myth. And a lot of people thought that there was trouble in Vietnam between blacks and whites, like there was in the United States in the 60s. There was such a race war here. But I've said this before to students throughout the country when you teach them, yes, there were different races in Vietnam. Obviously, there were different age groups. But in Vietnam, there was one color, and it was green, which was your uniform. You fought and you served shoulder to shoulder with people from all walks of life. And believe me, when you came back from Vietnam, no one could be racist because you served, you went through hell with these people. I mean, you get a cup of coffee, you get mad if they couldn't drink at your fountain afterward. And all this stuff happened, and I think Vietnam did a great deal for race relations in America. Some of the myths about Vietnam, that all the blacks hated the whites in Vietnam, that could not be farther from the truth.
Well, I think some of the things we forget sometimes, that the military is a micronism of what's going on back in the States. So in the 70s, people who were going to Vietnam who had been involved in the protest and so forth, and the Black Power and so forth, and when they went to Vietnam, they still had, in the 70s, they were starting to have a little bit of problems with people saying they won't go out, and Black Power and so forth, and a little bit of separation. But that was basically carrying over from the way they were in the United States. But when you went to the field, and that was back at the main bases, but when you went to the field, it was pretty much you a brother, and you, because your life and the life next to you depended on your buddy, and most of us fought for their friends rather than not to stop communism or whatever, but for the guy next door to them. So
exactly right. You ever got too philosophical there about stopping communism? You knew why you were there. You knew why you went to Vietnam. That myth that no one knew anything about Vietnam was not true. I mean, we should have known more. I wanted to ask you that question tonight, Bill. Is there's a theory when you start doing research on Vietnam, and the question came up to be in Alamance County. One of the students asked me afterwards, were you prepared to win in Vietnam, Mr. Matthews? Were you properly trained? Now let me throw that one to you first. You were a married man in Vietnam. Mm-hmm. You were there in 1968, the height of the war. There was over 400,000 men in Vietnam. Did you feel properly trained in Vietnam?
Well, and on two fronts, no. One, I didn't know where this Vietnam place was. All I knew that it was hot and the people were shooting at you.
It's a good start.
So I didn't know anything about the country. I didn't know anything about the people. I didn't know anything about their culture. My training was, I went through basic training at Fort Bragg. I left Fort Bragg and went to Fort Belvoir Engineering School. 2 weeks before I got out of engineering school, I got orders for Vietnam, even though I joined the Army to beat the draft with the understanding I was going to Germany, which I haven't been yet. They said they had to give me specialized training to go to Vietnam because I was going to Vietnam. They put me on a bus, me and a couple other guys. They carried us to Fort Lee, Virginia, took me out to a rifle range, gave me an M16. I shot 2 clips, I think, gave it back to them, got back on the bus, and went back to Fort Belvoir, and they said, okay, you're now trained.
There you go.
That was my entire training. Now, I know later they started carrying guys to jungle warfare school. I guess because I was an engineer, they didn't think I needed a whole lot more training, even though I did spend a lot of time in the field and so forth. And I got a lot of OJT training real quick. How about yourself? How much training did you get?
Well, I think I was pretty lucky because I knew right away when I was drafted I would end up in Vietnam. It's one of those things you got a feeling down deep. And I went to basic training in Fort Bliss, Texas in August. It was kind of cute down there then. And then I went to Fort Huachuca. I couldn't even pronounce it, in Arizona. And by all accounts, they had in Arizona built a Vietnam village, about the size of a high school campus, you might say. Think of the high school campus, about that size. They had everything there, the animal sounds, the actual animals from Vietnam, the topography, if you can, different things about Vietnam, the sounds of Vietnam they had piped in. And you walk through there, then you had, I think the best thing they ever did was they had 3 people there that were Vietnam veterans. They came back from Vietnam, still into service, and they sat down and talked to us. And believe me, Bill, when you're told to pay attention, most of us don't, but when you're told to pay attention to 3 men that may save your life by what they're saying, you could hear a pin drop. And these men are telling you what not to do, what to do in Vietnam, how to get to Vietnam, how to survive in Vietnam, and how to get home. And you listen and you thank them, and you walk out of the village, you think you're ready for Vietnam. And of course, the day you land in Vietnam, you know nothing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I guess I was pretty naive because I talked to a recruiter and he told me if I joined the Army for 4 years, I could pick my location, and I picked Germany. So going through basic training, my drill sergeant, who was very colorful, told me every day I was the sorriest blankety blank he'd ever seen, but he filled in the blanks.
Of course he did.
He told me every day, my first day in Vietnam, a little short guy in black pajamas was going to blow my sorry blankety blank away. I knew he didn't know what I was talking about because I knew for a fact there was no little short guys in black pajamas in Germany. So I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to him. But when that plane landed in Vietnam and that door opened and the smells and humidity came in, I realized I was not in North Carolina in tobacco fields. And then we got on the bus taking us over to 9th replacement, and everybody I saw were little short people in black pajamas, just like you issued your black pajamas when you were born over there. And then I started thinking about all the things he told me. And a lot of the training that I did doing basic training did come back. Sure. But I was assigned to an engineering group there at Long Bend, and I had a pretty cushy job there if I wanted it. And but being a country boy and also a little stupid, I spent a lot of time in the jungles with the 9th Infantry, which is another story in itself. And the whole history of Vietnam goes back a long time with our involvement or non-involvement and so forth. And
this is kind of a jumping off point. When you start to talk about Vietnam to students, you see a blank look, and they don't have any background of the history of Vietnam, the history of the United States, the fight against communism, the fight against aggression in the world. And all of a sudden, when you start giving them some facts, and you start explaining, if you will, the domino theory, you start explaining after World War II, the pledge by Nikita Khrushchev that he was going to conquer the world, he was going to take communism all over the world, our foreign policy was very black and white. We were going to stop communism wherever it tried to embellish itself in the world.
What is this domino thing you're talking about? I thought it was a game you played.
No, the domino... Get out of here. The domino theory, as most students knew after they looked it up that night, and boy, after one day, they came to class the next day with questions. And one student said, I didn't know we were in Vietnam under Eisenhower's term. I said, we were in Vietnam in 1956. We got out of Vietnam for all practical purposes in 1973. I don't think Bill Dixon and those that are listening tonight that there will ever be another war like Vietnam in our history. It changed everything I can think of, and I think we weren't prepared properly, but as we stayed there longer and longer and longer, we got prepared. Technology came in. Uniforms got better. Weaponry got better. Intelligence got better. Everything got better except our resolve to win the war. Somehow in the mix, we were thinking, well, maybe we could redo Korea and have a tie, North and South Vietnam, East and West Germany, Eastern and Western Europe. Maybe we could split the world in half. The communists can have half, and the free people will have the other half. That sold for a while,
Yeah.
but not forever.
Well, you know, the official date of start of the American war in Vietnam. They've had so many wars. We were the second French Indochina War or the American War. They've had the Chinese War, the French War, the Japanese War. Was November 1st, 1955 was the first date they gave, and we had advisors in before that, and so forth. And you know, the funny thing about it is, we gave Ho Chi Minh and General Yip weapons and taught them how to use it to fight the Japanese and so forth in Vietnam. And we were buddies and trained them and gave them so forth. And when World War II was over, I think Ho Chi Minh really felt that because he had such a relationship with America and so forth, that America would back his bringing Vietnam together as one country, as a national country, even though he was some communist leanings along about then.
It was a little more than leanings. People thought for a long time that Ho Chi Minh was a nationalist, but once you did a little research, you found out he was a communist through and through, and he had no plans to unify Vietnam. He was going to take Vietnam over completely from the day one, and I think we saw that written on the wall, and that's why we moved the elections back about 2 years. Hopefully the South Vietnamese would get a little stronger, because if we would have had the elections like it was slated after the 1954 Geneva Accords, Ho Chi Minh would have been a unanimous president. We knew that. He knew that. Yeah. We couldn't let that happen.
Well, you know, one of the things that surprised me in doing some research and so forth, that after the French were, after the war, Japan actually kept some of the French in prisoner of war camps rather than letting them out, to delay the French from taking over the country, and gave the Viet Minh, which was the arm of Ho Chi Minh, time to get some strength and so forth, and to grow and so forth. And even though they were captured, they were conquered, and supposed to be left the country, they were still having control over the doings in the country for a long time, until I guess England came in and kind of started handling the redoing of the country and so forth, and would give the French time to take over.
It seems like in history it's cyclical, and that now there seems to be a trend in teaching high school and college to get back to critical thinking. For a while it was, let's learn all the fact we can. Let's just get all these websites and get so much information that we know everything about everything. We know what, but we didn't know why. So now there's a new thing in the schools. They're doing standards again. And the standards are why. Critical thinking. Why did we go to Vietnam? Why did we fight World War II? Why did we object to the Holocaust? Why open so many doors that scholars now have to answer the questions? You can't just accumulate facts. You can't walk into a classroom today, at least I hope you can't, and hand kids 20 websites and say, good luck, we're doing away with books. You may do away with books, but you can never do away with questions.
Yeah.
That's why I think teaching Vietnam is a high water mark for a lot of colleges now. For a while, there wasn't a course on Vietnam, maybe 2 colleges in the country. Last I checked, there were 700 colleges teaching a course in Vietnam, from Harvard to NC State to Carolina, teaching Vietnam, and every class is full.
Well, I think one of the nice things, and one of the things that I thought that stood out by our course was it wasn't some professor or teacher standing up there lecturing. It was a live veteran coming in and speaking, and it gave the student a totally different format. They had to do the critical thinking themselves, and they could ask why, because each veteran has his own opinion why. And instead of sitting there and just reading off a textbook, it was you started questioning the veterans that come in. Why did you do this? And why did we do that? And
they asked some questions.
And that was, and I think that has been probably one of the strong points of the course was we never tried to tell the students what to think. We gave our opinions and suggested they do more research and come up with their own conclusions. Because as Vietnam veterans, as you well know, we don't always agree with everything. But there's so many mistruths out there. We were talking about it earlier tonight. There was and here I read where was the man who won the first black man to win the Medal of Honor in Vietnam won it in October of '65.
Yes.
We have a gentleman who lived here in North Carolina, Lawrence Joel.
Yes.
Who was a medic, and he was awarded the Medal of Honor, or earned the Medal of Honor. He wasn't awarded; it was earned the Medal of Honor for the Battle of the Hump in November 8th. So we were always told that Lawrence was the first African American to win the Medal of Honor since the Spanish-American War.
This is a caller.
And doing some research, we found out that that he was not the first, but the other man in October. We have a question.
We have a question.
Hello.
Hello. I wanted to ask Bob what the greatest benefits the Vietnamese people have realized from U.S. involvement in their country.
I think there's a couple. There's a couple to that. I think one of the benefits was that I think we went over there and we cared. We put our life on the line with them, and we tried to show them what it was like to have freedom, to make choices. And a lot of our men obviously died in Vietnam. A lot of their people died in Vietnam. And when we went back to Vietnam as visitors several years ago, remember my first trip back, I was so scared because I thought that we were like the villains. And they treated us like we were not the heroes, don't get me wrong, but they loved us because what we did for their people, we showed them there is a better way. You don't have to be a communist. You can be a freedom fighter. You can fight for ideals, and you can make yourself a better nation. And then as they got more and more involved in the U.S., we introduced them to the free enterprise system, how to make decisions, how to make your own money, how to build things, how to build your country up. And as we went back to Vietnam, as Bill mentioned 2 years ago, it's worked. I mean, they are completely a free enterprise system. If communism is alive and well in Vietnam, it's hiding, because I have no idea where it is. But thank you for the question.
If I might add to that, Bob, all the other countries who fought wars in Vietnam all tried to own and take over Vietnam.
Yes, they did.
The Americans went there to fight for the Vietnam people's freedom, whether it was whatever their version of freedom was. And we went there and we fought. We lost a lot of our own brothers and sisters, but we were fighting for them and their country, not to take their country over. And everybody else had always tried to take their country over and make their country part of their country, of their particular country.
I do think, too, we talked about this before, you and I, not on the air, but in different classrooms, as we're preparing. We were teaching about 90 teachers in Seattle. And one of the teachers asked me in the seminar, said, why do most Vietnam veterans feel like they left the South Vietnamese holding the bag? I said, well, we felt we didn't finish the job. We promised them aid, military aid, economic aid, all kind of aid in 1972. And then when we left, we cut the purse strings and we left them hanging out there. And it's bothered most of us for 40 years that we made a promise and we didn't keep it. And part of the bridge back, ironically, is we're keeping that promise today. And as veterans go back to Vietnam, and believe me, we're not the only group that goes back. There's hundreds of groups that go back every day. And they go back for one reason. That's to check on Vietnam. It's like a child. You spent a year of your life there fighting for freedom. You want to check and see how they're doing, how they've grown. Are you guys okay? And all vets admit that. Vietnam means a lot to us. It wasn't just a war. It's a country.
Yeah. Caller, I appreciate you calling. Do you have an opinion on your own, what we call? Oh, they're gone? Okay. Well, they can still hear us if they're there. Just wondering what kind of opinion they thought that we taught the Vietnamese people, the Vietnamese people taught us. And Bob, you want to go ahead and work on and talk a little bit more about the history of Vietnam, how we got involved, and
well, you know, Bill, the thing about Vietnam was that when we got involved in Vietnam, we went there as advisors, as you said. They've always had people there trying to take things from them. We went to train the Vietnamese, and we had a program called Vietnamization, where as we got into Vietnam, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, ended up with over 500,000 men in Vietnam and women. Most people do realize that over 10,000 women served in Vietnam. It wasn't just a man thing. It was an American thing. And for many, many years, in the early 60s, it was a popular thing. Vietnam was the place where we were going to make a stand against communism. Of course, it didn't work out the way we wanted to. But we kept going back to Vietnam, even brought Vietnamese people to this country and trained them in Alabama on how to fly helicopters. We wanted South Vietnam to fight North Vietnam and to win or at least hold their water. We gave them every chance we could, except at the end, when my favorite term hit. I'm going to get into that. I have an activity that a student asked me before. He said, Mr. Matthews, what is the scenario where we could have won in Vietnam? Because Americans love to win. We hate to lose. In fact, one class I was teaching, I mentioned we lost a war in Vietnam, and one of my guests was a Vietnam veteran. He walked out and slammed the door. And he said, I'll never come back to your class again. And he screamed, we did not lose that war in Vietnam. We have never lost the war. I had egg on my face. I said we lost the war. I simply said the country now is communist. I guess you're splitting hairs there. So I don't want to split that hair anymore. So I got kind of quiet. But Bill, when you hear people say that Vietnam is counted as a loss, it's in the L column. Do you agree?
No. The American soldier never lost the war, contrary to some of the veterans from World War II, the way they looked at us. We basically pulled out in 73, and then the Church Amendment came along and actually made it so it was against the law for us to go back to Vietnam. We couldn't give them, we could not supply them with weapons and so forth, but you still had the Chinese and the Russians supplying weapons to the North Vietnam just as hard as they could go. But because of the Church Amendment, we were not allowed to have American soldiers back there in combat. We were not allowed to furnish them, the South Vietnamese people, all the things that we had promised them when we pulled out. So we kind of left them in a lurch along those lines. But the American soldier really never lost a battle there, and always did above and beyond as way they treated the people, as well as they fought. They were as good as fighters as anybody. The thing about it, World War II is the average guy in combat probably saw maybe out of the 4 years he was maybe fighting for the war, he maybe saw 30 days or so, maybe a little bit longer of total combat. But thanks to a little thing called the helicopter, the Vietnam veteran saw probably close to 300 days of combat because they would take them in and drop them off a helicopter and pick them back up again. So there was, that was one of the aspects of the technology of the war was the helicopter would bring them in and they'd fight the battle, they'd pick them up, take them back, and drop them back again. They didn't have those pulled back and spent 3 or 4 months in training as they did in other wars and so forth.
That's a good segue, Bill, into our show. The next session we do in 2 weeks We're going to break Vietnam down into 4 fronts. We're going to try to talk about the war on water, the war in the air, the war on the ground pounders, and the hardest part of Vietnam to talk about is the war at home. We broke Vietnam down into 4 fronts. But we look at hindsight. One of the most vilified presidents we've ever had, Richard Nixon. And with hindsight, we're all poets, of course. You look at Nixon's career, and with Watergate coming up in 1972, he wins the election by the biggest landslide in history. He promises South Vietnam, we're going to stick to the end. We're going to not abandon you. Watergate hits. He loses all of his power. He couldn't catch a cold in D.C. after that. He's out. The Church Amendment's passed. Nam's over. I blame Watergate. If Watergate never happens, Richard Nixon never loses, never resigns, we win the war. That's my theory.
You were asking the caller, Jude. She's saying, I think the U.S. soldier taught the people of Vietnam courage and gave them hope.
That's great.
That's
That's great. We have got to be real close friends with some of the former Vietnamese soldiers here, and they're very special guys. So the next time we meet here, we'll be talking about the starting out on the different aspects of the war. We'll be bringing in some guests to speak to you a little bit about what they did, like the Air War, the Brown Water Navy, that sort of stuff. We're going to have some people come in. If you're out there and you're a veteran and you were participating in one of these aspects, give us a call and tell us about your story. Share your story with the other people in the show. And we thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to come in your house and share our story and talk about a thing that affected our lives so much. And
Still is.
we're looking forward to bringing you lots of good guests and so forth, and hopefully let you get some insight that you didn't have about the war. And
let me end the show tonight by asking Bill Dixon one more question. When's the last time you were in Vietnam, Bill?
Last night.
Thank you.
It never, actually this afternoon, it always comes up.
Thank you.
Yes.